Hi folks, this is a backgrounder on the Siemens case that we talked about in Berkeley. I will fill in some of the holes in our discussion and give a little bit of continuity to the overall flow. I'm going to talk about customer value analysis, about vision for Siemens imaging, and about capabilities analysis. And we'll push the discussion a little bit farther than that as well. So here's a bit of background on Siemens in Brazil. Let's talk about its global health performance, look at customer value and Siemens' competitive advantages and some of their disadvantages, talk about the 5 forces and 3 model and apply it to Siemens, look at its vision, look at the capabilities analysis, talk briefly about the financial scenarios that we talked about in class, look at service revenues at Siemens and also a bit more generally across the industry, look at some of the post-case financial trends, and talk about the implications. That'll keep us going for a while. As we talked about in class, and as many of you talked about in the Siemens cases you prepared, Siemens Global Diagnostics globally was kind of mediocre at the time. Underlying margin is declining, sales are kind of flat. Basic point is this is not sustainable, which is bad for Siemens Global, but actually an opportunity for Siemens in Brazil. If they can come up with an interesting opportunity that looks like it can raise revenue profitably, it'll be looked on favorably because Brazil is a big enough market for global to take seriously. Now let's think about advantages and disadvantages. Client value, both in hospital and clinic imaging departments. There's very varied imaging services. They need strong support and they want ongoing upgrades. That's what the clients want. And then let's think about how Siemens fits in terms of those client demands and client needs. In terms of advantages, it clearly has a differentiation advantage as a technology leader. It's very visible technically. It's at RSNA, the Radiological Society of North America. Basically, anybody globally who deals with Siemens sees it as having very strong technical positions. Cost advantage, it doesn't have one. It has higher costs for lots of reasons. Innovation advantages, it's very good at ongoing technical innovation. So in terms of competitive advantages, it's very much in the technology space. Then we get competitive disadvantages. In terms of differentiation, it's a service laggard. It'll sell equipment, but it's not nearly as good as some of its stronger competitors, particularly General Electric, at meeting service needs. In terms of cost, it's higher cost than local competitors. It's higher cost than emerging market M&Es such as Mindray from China. And innovation, at the same time as innovation is a competitive advantage, some of the mindset around innovation is actually a disadvantage. The belief in its technological dominance and its corporate complexity in the fact that Siemens Health is embedded in a very complex overall Siemens corporate business with many different business units. So again, some major advantages, but also some serious disadvantages that it needs to think hard about. Let me take a brief tangent here and think about common types of differentiation advantages. We've talked in class about how both cost and differentiation advantages are powerful and important, but it's particularly valuable to have differentiation advantages because the sky's the limit, whereas with cost advantages, it's basically a race to the bottom. Plus, frankly, differentiation advantage is a lot more fun. So I'm not saying give up on cost, but think hard about opportunities for differentiation advantages. And I want to think about a couple of classes. One is in the area of product design. And you can have advantage in terms of technical superiority, in terms of product features, in terms of your performance, so long as the performance is scaled versus relevant metrics that customers care about, in terms of aesthetics and design, in terms of reliability, durability, serviceability, many different aspects of products. And again, think hard about what it is that customers want, and then look for product designs that give you an advantage relative to competitors in terms of what those customer needs and desires are. Second class is around what I'll call organizational and system support. Things like speed to market with new products and services, complementary products and services, the service team that you use to support the product and the complements, the conformance to standards, the quality of the brand, the perceived reliability of the brand, and the ability to create trusted relationships. Both of these provide opportunities for differentiation. Product creates opportunities, and the organizational system and support creates opportunities. In all honesty, the second set, the organizational set, typically is longer lasting and more nuanced than products. It's relatively easy for competitors to see product advantages and catch up. It's much harder for competitors to even see and certainly to catch up on organizational system support. So again, just a brief tangent, if we're thinking about differentiation advantages, look hard for a set of product features and organizational features, and make sure that the organization part is there along with the product. Now let's come back to Siemens in Brazil. And first, just some of the survey results from the case around whether the diagnostic imaging market in Brazil is attractive. And the short answer is yes. The respondents, the very strong modal response, median response is 5. It's high. Now let's put a little bit more systematic analysis on that. Again, using data from the case. Is there growth? The short answer is yes. Here we have magnetic resonance, MR, computed tomography, X-ray, ultrasound, and in all cases there's growth, and really across multiple market segments. So the key takeaway here is both qualitatively and quantitatively, this is a desirable sector. And the CAGRs are a little different. The cumulative average growth rates are a little different across the four segments, the four modalities. But the truth is, across all four, there's desirable growth. And certainly, if we saw these growth rates in the U.S. or Canada or many of the markets we're familiar with, we'd be thrilled. We're often very flat. And here we have growth in Brazil at the time of the case that's often in double-digit rates, or at least very comfortable single-digit rates. And it's useful to think about the two types of markets here, the public market and the private market. In my terms, I think of the public market as a scale market. It's big. It's where a lot of the purchases are. So you certainly want to go after it. The private market I tend to think of as a growth market. It's taking off in Brazil, and this is on a smaller base, but this is probably where the biggest single growth is going to come from. So if you're Siemens or any other company in that market, both the public scale market and the private growth market are desirable. Now I want to think about the 5 forces plus 3 model of industry analysis. And we talked about this in class over the last couple of terms. This is the traditional Porter's 5 forces model, or at least the elements of Porter's 5 forces model, but pointed at the customer context rather than at rivals, because the customers are where the money is and where the needs are. And then we add the 3 more: social forces, new strategies, and complementary organizations. And from this, the goal of any analysis, any industry analysis, any customer value analysis, is to identify opportunities and threats to customer value. What is it the customers need? What is it you're providing now? What is it you could provide in the future? What do people want in the future? What are the opportunities? And who's trying to take away the value from you? So let's think about this for Siemens in Brazil. Let's start with the traditional 5 forces: buyers, threat of entry, substitutes, rivalry, and suppliers. It's mixed here. There's some green checks. Buyers, growing demand. They require service and support, which is good because it's higher value. It's a bit of a problem because it's more challenging. On the other hand, the governments tend to be slow and complex, and there's hospital consolidation going on. Those are challenging. Threat of entry. There's some real threats here. There's technology diffusion, there's learning, patent protection doesn't really hold all that well, and there's threats coming in the low end from both domestic companies and companies globally like Mindray. Substitutes, that works for you. At least at the time, doesn't look like there's any new imaging modalities on the horizon. There was this amazing growth in the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's flattened out a little bit, although certainly are things like PET and SPECT and the like. Rivalry, challenging. There's some differentiation on big ticket, but there's strong competitors, and there's the new and low-end rivals. Suppliers, this is pretty straightforward. Materials are about 25% of cost. Lots of them exist, both domestically and globally, so there's no real major challenges in the supply space. Then go on and look at the 3 more: social forces, complements, new strategies. Here, it's mixed, but it's more on the green side than the red. It's more green and check question mark, really. If you think about social forces in terms of aging population, technology desire, those are good. Uncertain politics, that raises some questions. Complements, multi-layered post-service and upgrades, that's good because those are high value. Imaging media, healthcare IT, all of these are good. The question mark on it is more, can a firm provide it, rather than whether the market wants it. New strategies, bioinformatics, decision support, payer partnerships, all of these are good. There's new opportunities, but the question mark is there because a company has to really be able to go after it. Where this takes us is if we look at the buyer space, and this really reflects what we saw in the analysis of growth, there are serious demands and serious opportunities. Some challenges, but if you go after it right, they're real opportunities. And if you take the other 7, the greens and the reds, for the most part, this is green pushing towards an opportunity to be able to provide new types of buyer value, real opportunities to take advantage of the market. So what should the vision to serve this market be? And let me provide a couple of sort of baseline options. One is to think, is the vision based on this? Is the vision based on equipment and brain scans? Basically, the technologically driven, product-driven view of the market. Or instead, should the vision be based on this? Should it be based on the patient and the clinicians, the healthcare practitioners, who are providing service to the patients? And I hope at this point, by this point, this is a completely rhetorical question. Clearly, the vision needs to be based on this. This stuff down here in the lower left is wonderful, but unless it translates into this, patients, clinicians, it doesn't mean anything. So here's one way of stating a vision for this market. I'm sure there's lots of ways of doing it, but this would be one way that I at least would state my vision for the market. Provide clinics with multiple imaging options, CT, MR, ultrasound, and the like, with full support now and full support in the future. Broad base of options, lots of support. And could I imagine creating a competitive advantage for a company that does this well? And clearly the answer is yes. There is demand for multiple options. There's demand for support. There is now, there will be in the future. And a company that's able to do this well will have advantages versus others and will be able to perform well. So now let's come back to Siemens' current position in the industry. And if we look at the data in the case, it's got substantial willingness to pay. Its customers view its technology as a plus and have a fair amount of willingness to pay for it. If you look at the big ticket digital imaging, Siemens, GE are way up there compared to pretty much everybody else. And this is for computer tomography, quality versus price in Latin America. And there's a little bit of separation between Siemens and GE. I'm not sure that I'd take that separation as meaningful, but certainly if I look at Siemens and GE versus Shimadzu or Hitachi, even Toshiba, and very much versus the refurbished market, there's a real difference. There's, in terms of the cost of the products and the perceived quality of the products, GE and Siemens are way up there in the upper right. And that plays out if you look at Exhibit 10 in the case and think about where Siemens is positioned along different criteria, dimensions that customers care about. It's excellent in quality, slightly ahead of GE, it's tied with GE on price, slightly ahead of GE on technical, tied with GE on brand, tied with GE, although not excellent, only good, in payment terms. So strong technically, a little bit of concerns about payments, but overall a really strong position. So is this an Alfred E. Neumann Mad Magazine situation where we don't have any worries at all? What me worry? Siemens, I'm in great shape. And certainly if you're at Siemens, the temptation is to think, yes, of course we're in great shape. So let's look at the value chain. And here's a simple value chain for computer tomography. From suppliers to R&D and design, to manufacturing, to logistics, marketing, sales, and then service. And we think about where Siemens is strong and where Siemens might have some challenges. Certainly it's strong over here on the technical end, the left-hand end, in terms of suppliers and R&D design. The others, maybe not so clear. Manufacturing it doesn't have local production. Some others do. That's a challenge. Outbound logistics, there's some issues there, both in terms of the cost, the taxes, but also just in handling. Service, bottom line is people don't think its service is as good as GE, and its turnaround time is slow. And the marketing and sales, it's paying a lot of money for commissions to distributors. It outsells GE in the high-end segment, but because it's selling to distributors, and as we talked about in class, it's missing information from its customers. And then the question is, what attributes do key customers value most for their time and money when they buy imaging equipment? Is it the left-hand side with the green checks, or is it more on the right-hand side where we've got the red downward arrows and the question marks? And we talked about this in class. There's no new information here, but let's reinforce this. If you look across the different segments, the regions, the sectors, public hospitals, diagnostic clinics, north, northeast, any part of the country. And if you look particularly here at post-sales support, everybody wants it. Doesn't matter what hospital you're in, what region you're in, every customer views this as particularly high. And this is where Siemens is weak. So if you go back to the What Me Worry part of Alfred E. Neumann and Mad Magazine, Siemens should definitely be worried. It's weakest where its customers care most. And that's a bad position for any of us to be in. We talked about the scenarios. I won't, we spent a fair bit of time on this in class. I won't go over them in depth. I'll just remind us that the value of scenarios is partly functional. It gives us different estimates to the bottom lines. And it's especially strategic. It helps us figure out the structure of the opportunity. It helps us figure out where the sensitivities are. It gives us a baseline for discussion. And used well, it can help get buy-in from multiple stakeholders and multiple clients. If we take the implications of the scenarios that we worked on, there's 2 or 3 things here that matter that come through really clearly. One is, where are the profits? First off, they're in the post-sales support and ongoing upgrades. They're partly in, there's certainly some sales from profits from selling the hardware, but for the most part, it's coming from support and upgrades. And the support and upgrades partly applies to new sales, but you get the really big win if you can get it in the installed base as well. And what this means for strategy, as we talked about in class, is what I'll call touch the customer. The leitmotif, the power comes from you knowing what the customer wants, what the nuance is, them being able to explain it to you, you being able to explain to them what you've got, you being able to adapt and adjust to what they need. And this especially comes from direct sales, because you've got multiple touch points with your customers. Now, it can come with distributors as well, if you view this as customer-facing partnerships. So the distributor goes to the customer and you go with them. So I wouldn't rule out distributors. There certainly is a possibility here for a combination strategy. But some of it is going to be better off if it has direct sales with multiple touch points, as well as the customer-facing partnerships with distributors. So if we think of this in terms of key capabilities in VRIN, valuable, rare, inimitable, non-substitutable, customer support is clearly it. If you're going to succeed, flourish, gain strong competitive advantage in this industry, this is what you need. Strong customer support. It's clearly valuable. Customers want it. It's rare. Not everybody's got it. It's inimitable because it's really hard. It's really complex and really hard to pull off. And it's non-substitutable. There's no other way to do it. If you can do this well, this is where the profits are going to come from. I want to take a quick tangent and just think about another market in which service revenue is important. And this is just another example in life sciences market of how big a deal service revenue is. And these are some data from healthcare IT. They have the share of revenue from the top 50, I forget exactly how many companies I've got in here, roughly 40 or 50, in which I'm able to break down the revenue into service, the blue, software, the red, and hardware, the green. And if you look at the top 15 companies based on revenue, service revenue is more than 75%. It's about close to 85%, in fact, of the revenue. Software is another 10 or so, and hardware is a tiny proportion of it. So where the money's coming from is service, and then to a lesser extent, but a real extent, software, and much less the boxes. Smaller firms, in terms of revenue, are still only making a small amount of their money off hardware, but there's a bigger split here between software and service. The winners, in terms of revenue, and this correlates strongly with profitability as well, are the ones that are able to get strong service revenue. This is true across many different segments, parts of the medtech life sciences industry. Just using this as another example beyond diagnostic imaging. So let's think about the options in Brazil. Should they do local manufacturing? My take on it is not now. It's not the primary competitive disadvantage. Yes, it's adding to their cost, but the customers are at least somewhat willing to pay the cost. The real issue is the support, not the cost that's coming from the manufacturing. Maybe in the longer term, it's certainly technically possible. There are strong global companies that have manufacturing in Brazil that works really well. It's true in auto. Volkswagen, Ford, others have strong manufacturing in Brazil and do very well with it. Embraer in aerospace has a strong manufacturing base in Brazil. Johnson and Johnson in consumer does manufacturing in Brazil. So it's certainly possible to do that. Now there's substantial political uncertainty, especially now. I have to admit, in 2019, I'd be reluctant to make major investments in Brazil because I'm just not sure what's going to happen politically. But in the longer term, there may well be an opportunity for local manufacturing. Right now, though, if you think about both the competitive opportunity and the competitive disadvantage, the part that's needed is to touch the customer. Build a direct sales force, possibly by hiring staff from the distributor, or possibly, if one's available, buying a whole distributor. Build on existing distributors, sharing sales calls. And as I say, in point three, as I say, it's not clear that there's a local company with a strong sales force in place. But if there is, there may well be an opportunity to grab it. I think it's most likely to be some combination of one and two. A hybrid strategy with building a direct sales force and building on existing distributors. But now or in the future, there might actually be an opportunity to buy your way in. We can do some comparison of the channels. And I won't go over this in depth, but if you think about, direct sales force, indirect sales force, it boils down to direct, the benefits in terms of customer contact and knowledge, control, and lower variable costs, some challenges in terms of higher fixed costs. With the indirect, benefits in terms of flexibility and market range, and the challenges in terms of the not being able to touch the customer and higher variable costs. So Siemens at the time, certainly at the time of the case, is almost certainly going to be looking for some sort of hybrid strategy. So touch the customer strategy. Build the direct sales force, especially for sophisticated customers. And shift some clients from distributors, as well as expanding the market. And I think there's an opportunity to do both of those. Some shift, some expansion. This is particularly important for complex technology. It's particularly important when you have a depth of product offerings and want to sell multiple types of product within the modality or across modalities. It's good for large hospitals. It's good for research hospitals. It's good for a longer purchasing cycle with public hospitals. It's good for developing relationships and really maximizing the amount of knowledge you exchange, how much you learn from the customers, how much you teach them. And it's great for increasing service revenue, both for your new sales and for your installed base. So again, a really strong argument for direct sales so that you can touch the customer. Then selectively expand the distributor network. Leverage existing relationships. Start to enhance your presence in remote areas. Think through the distributor incentives for service contracts and knowledge exchange. And again, this is still a touch the customer contract. Strategy. It's part of a hybrid strategy, but both part of them have to be touch the customer. Shared with your distributor, but you need to be there. Longer term, as we said before, there may well be an opportunity for a regional production hub. But the first priority is clearly the touch the customer strategy. Some post-case financials for Siemens. Siemens Healthcare revenue has grown quite well. Down a little bit in 2017, but overall it's growing comfortably. Siemens Healthcare profitability, EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, sunk, remember at the time of the case, has come well back. And in fact is in pretty good shape. The last year or so is down a little bit, but certainly compared to the time of case, it's much stronger. Siemens segment revenue, here's 2015 versus 2018. And the key point here is what's now called Siemens Healthineers is what is a really big part of the company. Overall revenue is basically the top. Financial services a little bit, process industries, the digital factory, just as GE has their digital strategy, so does Siemens. What they call mobility, building technologies, energy, wind power, power and gas. Come back here to Healthineers. It's a really big part of the company. Now, at the same time, this is a really complex company. If you think about what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different major segments. That's a lot of things to stay on top of. With regulatory change going on, technical change going on, global change going on, competitive change going on, trying to stay at the frontier of these 8 segments is really tough. If you look at profitability, the digital factory is doing really well. Healthcare is number 2. So biggest in terms of revenue, number 2 in terms of profitability. The others are all making money, although it's somewhat lower levels. So if you think about Siemens and health, and really Siemens and the rest of the business, there starts to become a really strong logic for taking this healthy, strong, growing business, Healthineers, and splitting it off. Rather than doubling down on it in the midst of 7 or 8 other segments, splitting it off, letting it run on its own bottom, so the company can focus more closely on some of the other segments. And in fact, they split it off as a separate business unit within Siemens, reporting its own financials in 2015, and last year, 2018, they did an IPO, an independent public offering. I think Siemens still holds a fair amount of the shares, just as we saw with GE and their spin-off of health, where they're going to hold much of the shares. But it is now actually a separate business, separate, running on its own bottom, not having to deal with as much of the complexity of the corporate overhead. If we look at a few of the data, the trends for Siemens Healthineers over the last few years, since they're now reporting out separately, SG&A, selling general admin, essentially their marketing, is basically flat. R&D has actually come up a bit, spending more money on technology, at the same time as not really putting a lot more effort into an SG&A. That may be a good thing, or I'm not so sure. It may not be. This is if you look at it, if you compare it to its competitors, and I don't have these numbers. Well, I do actually have these numbers in here. So here's the medtech median for R&D expenditure and SG&A. Siemens is well above the industry median for R&D. It's close to 10. The industry's at 5 or 6. Again, reinforcing the point that GE really loves technology and loves spending money on technology. Industry median for SG&A for marketing is over 30. GE's at 16. Siemens is about 16, so half. And so there's not a lot of sign here yet that the mentality has changed much. Even though it's spun off Healthineers, it's still largely a technology company and nowhere near its industry competitors in terms of its emphasis on marketing and service. We can look a bit of it at Healthineer segments: imaging, diagnostics, advanced therapies. If you look at the top, in terms of revenue growth, imaging's grown, diagnostics has grown, advanced therapies have grown. If you look at profitability, EBIT, imaging is basically flat. Diagnostics is down a bit. Advanced therapies up and then down a little bit in 2018. So overall, if you think about the model we've used for strategy and think about market positioning across these 3 segments for Siemens Healthineers, let's take this market position and the different service lines. What we've got is imaging, advanced therapies, image-guided work, and diagnostics standing on their own, but also having the potential to cross-sell and to share some technology and share some customer knowledge. And the interesting thing to me is it's not the sharing doesn't have to happen only inside GE. There's also the radiation oncology business. It doesn't show up in the segments because Siemens spun it off and entered into a partnership with Varian, but it's still part of its business. In the partnership with Varian. Varian does the cells, but Siemens people go along with it, and at the same time as you're working on radiation oncology, there's opportunities if they choose to pick them up to help people think about Siemens business in imaging and diagnostics and advanced therapy. So again, looking at market positions both individually and opportunities for sharing, it's very much there for Siemens. Now, whether they take advantage of it or not is another question, but the opportunity is there. A general slide on medtech leaders in 2017 sales. Medtronic, the largest after its Covidien acquisition. J&J in devices, and this is just J&J's device revenue, separating out consumer and separating out the Janssen Pharma business, is number 2 with its ongoing acquisitions. Fresenius from Germany, number 3. Thermo Fisher with lots and lots of acquisitions, having caught up and now basically being tied with Fresenius. GE Healthcare stepping back a little bit in 5. Siemens Healthineers in 6, just ahead of Abbott Devices, and I think does this have St. Jude? I think St. Jude is included in Abbott Devices. It's not listed on there anyways because Abbott bought St. Jude a couple of years ago. Moving on down. Cardinal, for Diana's sake, is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth in the top 10. Striker, which we saw earlier, in the top dozen or so. And we'll see what it looks like in 2018. Some trends in the medtech industry. Basically flat in terms of revenue. Sales grew up to the early part of the 2010s. They've been flat the last 5 or 6 years. And this is taking data across the companies I'm tracking. In 2017, there were 59 firms in the data set, and with total revenues of roughly $350, $400 billion, about a half to a third of pharma, and basically flat. There's really tight pressure on prices, especially in most traditional developed markets. Return on sales grew slowly but comfortably through the early 2010s and has come back down the last 4 or 5 years as price cutting and pressure has really come on board. Look in terms of employees; those also grew through the early 2010s and are now flat. Now, just because it's flat doesn't mean there's no hiring, because in fact there's exit and entry, but it's exit and entry on pretty much a flat base because of the strong pressure coming from the market on price controls. And one of the reasons for the pressure is because of increasing expenditure on pharma. People are looking for places to cut health tech expenditures, and have decided, rightly or wrongly, that medtech is the place they can do it. Certainly, if I talk to my friends in medtech, they're convinced it's the wrong choice. So, a couple of implications for the case. First, around industry analysis, and the two main points here. First, we need to know where the value is, not where we wish it was. We need to recognize what customers want and not get wowed up by the things we love doing, like the technology in Siemens' case. Customer value is what matters, not our own personal value. And then service value, especially in medtech, service margins are usually higher. It's true in imaging, it's true in health IT, it's true in pretty much every part of the industry. So building a strategy that helps you get access to the service and the upgrades is critically important. Then we go to firm analysis. We all want growth. That requires flexibility. We all want VRIN capabilities, but they have to be VRIN in terms of the customer, not our firm history. They have to be VRIN in terms of what the customer wants now and will want in the future, not what used to be valuable. And scenarios. They give us this really wonderful base where we can have a discussion around where the critical points are and what matters the most. And finally, I'll keep coming back to this point around touch a customer. And there's a real duality here in market access. We get control when we in complex product markets. That's a good thing. We also want range, though, and we often can't get the full range through our internal control, and that's where partners come in. So for most of us, some combination of control through direct sales, partners for the range is going to be a hybrid winning strategy. So very much a touch the customer. And finally, last slide. Just remember, it's our customer. Touch your customer, whoever it is, whether you think of this, whether they're a patient in some context, a client in some context, a partner in some context, a customer, whatever they are. Be front and center. Be involved with them. Know them. They know you. Build a relationship. Exchange information. Care about each other. And care about each other's future. So thanks for the term, and I'll be happy to chat about any of these things both online and when we get back together again in Toronto in April.